Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Meyer. Welcome to PCC's UC 2020 session, Managing Through Change. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Kerin Stackpole. Kerin Stackpole is a director at Paul Frank & Collins in Burlington, Vermont, and is the leader of the Employment and Labor Law Group. Her practice areas include employment law, business counseling, and general civil litigation. Kerin is a native of Burlington and practiced law in Vermont, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. She's an honors graduate of the Washington College of Law, American University, and Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. Kerin has been recognized by her peers for her skill in labor and employment law through inclusion in the Chambers and Partners, USA, Best Lawyers of America, and Super Lawyers. She has served on numerous community boards, including VNA, Wake Robin, and Wheaton College. Kerin, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to stop
Thank you very much.
the screen, let you share yours, and you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to come. And I thank PCC for inviting me to do that. I have a long and sweet history with the company. It was my dad's office was its beta site. My dad was a pediatrician for about 50 years. And so his office was a beta site for some of PCC's first products. So glad
Wonderful
to,
history.
yeah, glad to be with you. Thank you folks for tuning in today. One of the things that I was asked to speak about today, or the primary thing I was asked to speak about, really was, managing through change. This is really hard. There is a lot going on in the world right now. And not only for those of you who are likely small business owners as pediatricians. Some of you may be larger business owners and have 50 or more employees, but many of the folks that I deal with on a regular basis all across the country are smaller businesses that are really finding change difficult in this time. I will certainly say this though. There's nothing new about change being hard. Change is always hard. And as the world, the marketplace, technology, and even the employee base changes, there are lots of things that you as business owners really need to figure out. So let's dive into some of those. And as the functions come up in terms of questions that people have, happy to do that and take a look at any of the questions that you may have. Alex may sift us through some of those as well. But let me just talk generally about, change is definitely difficult. Change is one of those things that can be, hard for everybody. But what are the basic pieces of it? Number one, you have laws that are coming online all the time, particularly now. I will tell you that as a labor and employment lawyer, we've seen more laws and regulations passed in short order in the last couple of months than we've seen in a couple of years in our particular space. As many of you have probably already dealt with, there's the FFCRA, which is the leave that is related specifically to COVID-related conditions or quarantines, but also an extension of the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, allowing employers or requiring employers to allow employees to have some family medical leave if in fact a child of theirs is not going to school, or even now may have been enrolled in camp, but in fact that camp is canceled. Now what do I do? What do I do with my child? And if it was canceled due to COVID related reasons, some of these new laws may apply. So it's a really important thing to align yourself with a local HR professional if you don't have one on staff, or a local HR organization. Society for Human Resources Management would be a good example. Pretty low fee to be an annual member of an organization like that, and you get a lot of updates and information that you can use to stay on top of those laws and regulations that are changing so rapidly. Or align yourself with a labor and employment lawyer who can help you in that regard. I can certainly say that not only have there been recent changes to the law, that would also include unemployment, which is very much impacting employers at this point, because in fact, we have some people in the workplace who have decided that they would prefer to go on unemployment because of the level of unemployment presently offered based on some of the recent statutes, rather than necessarily stay at work. So that's a big challenge for folks, not only that the statutes were passed and you have to understand them and stay on top of them so that you can comply, but also because they may be having an impact on who is willing to work and when they're willing to work. So those are certainly some big things. Money's tight, or it's coming in slowly. Most businesses are seeing that. We do have to remember that there has been no suspension in minimum wage rules. There's been no suspension, with regard to contracts that you may have with some of your employees, whether they're docs or nurses or other medical professionals or regular staff members who are administrative in nature. There haven't been any changes to those things, so people need to get paid pursuant to either state and federal wage and hour law, or they need to be paid pursuant to whatever their contracts are. So that's an important thing, and that's one of the things that is difficult to manage, to keep all of that in your head while you're trying to run a practice. The workforce is changing. As I mentioned, you have some people who now are making choices to be unemployed versus to be employed based on monies that are available right now in a difficult economic time. There are also, as we'll talk about in just a minute, some changes in who's out there, who's available. Now, obviously, unemployment has gone up significantly. So the labor markets in a lot of jurisdictions where you may be practicing may have gotten better. There may be more people available to you. But frankly, I don't think that just because there is a spike in unemployment right now, that you are going to find it really, really easy to find good people if you were short before. So the nature of the workforce is changing. For you to understand some of those changes, I think is important. And we'll go over some of those today so that you can. For you to be mindful of how it's changing and how you can respond to it. Also, your services may need to change. I know for my family, I have a 14-year-old, and we certainly engaged with her pediatrician during this time and had televisits. I had a televisit with my physician too during this time. So there's lots of changes like that that are happening that are going to require perhaps new training for you or for your staff. And that's going to be an important piece and an element of change too. May also mean that you're changing things with regard to your billing and certainly with regard to timing for appointments, that sort of thing. There are fewer people available to do the work. Generally speaking, the labor markets have been tight nationwide. Like I said, you may have people who are making choices right now, though, that is still making it hard to find folks. Pace of change is obviously increasing. These darned phones, or as I like to call it, those machines, right? All these machines that we have, the pace of that change, just because of technology, is huge. The pace of change in information, and that can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming for staff. It can be overwhelming for you because there's so many places in which information can and needs to be retained. Change is definitely a constant necessity. You have to kind of get used to it, and you cannot be afraid to fail. You cannot be afraid to fail because failure is going to happen. And as you manage change, you're going to have to try to do things differently. And that does mean that you're likely to have to sustain some failures. Think about, New Coke. Coca-Cola was losing market share to Pepsi decades ago, and it decided we're going to come out with a new product, New Coke. And they rebranded themselves, and it went in like a lawn dart. Nobody wanted New Coke. They wanted the old stuff. So they figured it out, and they thought to themselves, all right, well, we're going to ditch that. We thought it was a really great idea. We're going to ditch that. We're going to go back, market our classic Coke a little bit differently. And oh, look, we're going to get into the water business. So there are ways that you can rise like a phoenix out of the ashes to the extent that things happen. But last but not least, in terms of what I'll say about the nature of change, is that it can be exhausting. You need to take care of yourself. It is not enough to be a business owner and also a practitioner, but it is also you are going to have to be that change agent and the person who is running the practice ultimately And you have to take care of yourself because you will need to take time away, and you will need to be able to delegate effectively to the people around you. So let's talk basically about that talent pool, just to give you a few, pieces of frames of reference for us to be looking at some of the things that we'll be talking about. So if you look at this particular chart from the Department of Labor via the Wall Street Journal, specifically, it shows you what that workforce is going to look like in 2025 from an age perspective. And as you can see, people like me, we're leaving that workplace in the not too distant future. And you can see that 16 to 19-year-olds, 20 to 24-year-olds, you're going to have a smaller number of those folks. Birth rates are definitely not increasing. So again, that tightness in the market is definitely going to continue. Also, there are differences in terms of expectations for each of these groups. Not to get into stereotypes, but there are patterns. There are patterns that we can see in terms of movement, people who will move from one job to another, and the reasons that people will move. Native technology folks are those folks that are basically under 45, and those of us that are over 45, those darn machines, technology may be a little bit harder, or it may be just not part of our normal work habit or our work history. So there may be differences in how you train folks, what you train them on, and their level of comfort with various things. So the changing nature of the workforce is an important thing for just to us to have an awareness of, because it may mean different modes of communication. It may mean different benefits that may be important. As a basic example, many of us grew up thinking, oh, 401k, got to really go after that 401k. These days, you have a lot of people coming into the workplace who are asking, do you have student loan forgiveness? And so benefits and the things that will attract people to you and will keep good people in your employ may change over time based on the changes in these demographics. You'll also notice this chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which definitely demonstrates that you have a lot more people who are working for you who are in a two-person parent household, two working parent household. And that's an important thing to think about too, because it goes directly to flexibility. Flexibility is something that is becoming more demanded of employees that are coming into the workplace now more than ever before. I'll show you some statistics in a moment. But the bottom line is that you need to be thinking about this as a business owner and as somebody who wants to attract and retain good people. What are the kinds of things? What are the kinds of benefits? What are the kinds of structures in terms of scheduling that I may have to be thinking about, or work tasks that I can assign people that may be meaningful, whether they're remote tasks, the things that can be done remotely, or whether they're things that can be done on slightly different time schedules. If there is dictation that is needed for medical records, because believe it or not, some people still do that. If there is dictation or transcription, if there are billing things that can be done at different hours, those may be things that you as a business owner may want to be thinking about in terms of changing your practices in order to be more effective and in order to attract and retain good employees. So there have been a number of studies recently that talk about these kinds of things. 2014 Bentley University study talking about a vast majority of job applicants, 77%, saying that they really were looking for flexible work schedules and the ability to work from home. Obviously, in this COVID time, many of us have learned how to do that. You see me here out on my back porch, and that works well for me. Front porch in the morning, back porch in the afternoon seems to be good. But we're also managing two other individuals in the house who are doing similar things. And I'm hoping that nobody's going to mow the lawn while we're in the middle of this session. So even that is a change to figure out what works. Do I have the technology base at my home if I'm going to do that? And if I'm going to have somebody work for me, what is that going to mean? Because if you have somebody working remotely, you may have provided them with certain machines. You may have provided them with certain equipment and what you do to protect that equipment, to meet your HIPAA obligations, and to successfully do your work. It's not like it can't be done, but it may require you to go through a few more hoops, and perhaps have some written agreements between you and those individuals, and make sure that you have good technology support for those individuals if you want to meet this need of flexibility. Notice that in 2018, there was a QuickBooks survey of employees, and indicated that only 18% of them actually had those flexible work arrangements that they really wanted. And many of those people, not quite half, but many, said, you know what, I'm thinking about looking for another job because I don't have the flexibility that I want. You should also know that some states, including the great state of Vermont, where we're broadcasting from, some states have actually enacted flexible workplace requirements of employers, where employers have to at least consider flexible work arrangements proposed by employees. And this can look very much the same as a reasonable accommodation analysis that you might make as an employer if an employee with a disability comes to you and says, hey, listen, I need some flexibility based on my disability. Similarly, employees may come to you and say, I want some flexibility because the state law may require it, or just because the marketplace may require it. And then it's a question of, how am I going to handle those requests? You as a business owner need to be thinking about a process for looking at those requests, making sure that you're looking at them fairly, that you're actually considering them, and that if you are going to say yes, you're putting in structures that will make them work. If you're going to say no, that you have good communication with employees so that they understand your reasoning. Turnover is huge these days. It got it to an all-time high in 2018, reaching nearly 20%. If you look down further in this slide, middle bullet, you'll see by industry, the hospitality industry and healthcare are the two highest turnover rates. Not surprising. They're hard. There are lots of demands on time. There's lots of demands for accuracy, and for making sure that people really do have the skills that they need to meet very specific requirements. So you see this all over the country. You can see in different geographic areas that you may have more turnover. Frankly, we haven't seen these trends change tons in the last several months based on the COVID piece, because in fact, many people who may have been dissatisfied previously with their work situation have taken this opportunity with regard to COVID to say, you know what, I'm going to step back. I'm going to step back. And if my employer doesn't have the kind of work that I need to have, maybe I'll go on unemployment for a period of time and rethink. So I don't think you're going to see these turnover rates going down significantly, which again, the takeaway for you as a business owner and as an employer is, then how am I going to attract and retain good people? And that is managing the change that comes with that. You will see that SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, estimates $223 billion is the cost of turnover for employers based on culture issues, meaning I don't feel appreciated by my boss. I feel like my boss doesn't communicate well. I get yelled at, or gee, I just don't have good and challenging work. So, and you'll see that there are very significant correlations between whether or not I, as an employee, think that my manager is good at what they do and fair to me. If I don't think so, I'm leaving. And you'll notice that 60% of the people surveyed by this particular SHRM survey in 2019 said, my manager doesn't know how to lead a team. And that's not uncommon. I see that a lot in the businesses that I deal with across the spectrum and across the country, that oftentimes what we as business owners do is we promote those individuals who are good at what they do. So if you have a young doc who's really good at what they're doing, I'm going to make that person maybe a manager. Hey, they may be a really good doc, but unless they have good training about how to be a good manager, may not be good at that. You have a good car salesman, can sell cars to anybody, but when that person has to manage other individuals, may not be that good. So it is not an uncommon thing that we see, and it's a separate set of skills that need to be acquired by people when they start to manage other humans. Because when you don't have good managers, 1 in 3 people are going to leave. So why do people stay? People stay mostly because of culture. And while paid well, this isn't in any particular order. These are just reasons that people stay. But people stay because, generally speaking, there's a feel good aspect. They feel like they are appreciated. They feel like they are valued. They feel like they are given opportunities to learn and to grow. And it's important as a manager and as a leader to be able to every day have the kind of inputs that you need to make a successful workforce. So, what are some of those ingredients? One, culture of respect. Make sure that your employees know that they're valued. Now, some people think, oh, Karen, do we have to hold their hands all the time? Nope, that's not what I'm suggesting. But I am suggesting that basic kindness, politeness, and recognition of effort will make people be more loyal, work harder, work more successfully. If people are being yelled at, they're not being appreciated, they're not being respected, their ideas are being ignored, they will leave. That will cost you time, energy, and money. So don't do it. Make it a point to take time to manage the humans. That means being present, literally putting time in your calendar to be present for employees to see, how are you doing today? Is there anything you need? What challenges are you facing today? How can I help you with those challenges? Those are really basic management techniques that can help you be much more successful and attract and retain really good folks. I'll tell you something that I worked for my dad in his pediatric practice when I was in high school and in college. And I will tell you what I saw my father do at the end of every single day was he would walk from one end of the office to the other and speak to every single person. And he would say, thank you for today. Really appreciate your efforts. He would walk through the file room. He would walk through the phone room where the nurses were doing the triage calls. And he would thank every single person. And when he stopped practicing after 50 years, there were lots of people who very specifically said to him and to me, I would have done anything for your father because I always felt like I was appreciated. And that's a really, really simple lesson, very personal, obviously, for me, but it's been a truism in 30 years of practicing law that you get fewer complaints, more effort, more loyalty, and less turnover when you create a culture of respect. Culture of respect starts with clear expectations. It's okay for you to say, hey, I expect you to do certain things. They can be things like, I need you to see this many patients, a day, or we need to get this many charts done in this amount of time every single day. They can be actual work things, or they can be things like, hey, I expect you to thank the staff, or hey, I expect you to actually show up on time, to actually be here and not taking your boots off and shaking the snow off, at 9:15 when your shift starts at 9, but rather showing up a few minutes early so you're ready to rock and roll at 9. So setting clear expectations with specificity, critically important for supervisors. Honest and timely feedback. I will tell you that as a lawyer, this is the thing that I find most difficult for my clients, and the thing that will get you in the biggest trouble. Because it's all well and good to think, well, I'm an employer at will. I can fire somebody if I don't like what they're doing. I don't have to give them a reason or anything like that. That's a big old myth. It is true that many states are still employment at will states, but there are tons of exceptions to those things. And so the answer is that if you are going to hold somebody accountable for some behaviors, and that behavior may affect whether they're promoted or whether they're fired, you need to give them honest and timely feedback about that performance, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And so those are going to be really important things that are going to be expected of you in order to be a good manager, in order to make sure that people are going to stay with your practice. Opportunities for learning. You saw that on the previous charts from SHRM and other organizations. very, very clear that people always want to be acquiring skills, especially with the younger demographic coming into the workforce. The teaching methods that have been used in the last 10 to 15 years in schools is very much about self-directed learning. That is now carrying into the workforce, where we are seeing a lot of employees who say, wait, I want to learn something, or wait, I want to take on more responsibility, or wait, I want to design X. Those are trends that are not going to go away. And so, as an employer, you need to be thinking about what are the opportunities for learning, for progression, for advancement, for meaningful work that I can give to my employees. That will help you keep good folks, and that will help you manage change more effectively. We mentioned recognition and appreciation for good work. That can be a thank you. That can be a pizza on Fridays. My office today, because it is Juneteenth, is actually letting everybody go early today in recognition of Juneteenth as a holiday. Accountability. Accountability is important, loops back to that honest and timely feedback. If you have employees who are not doing well, who are struggling, who are not meeting standards, you need to pull them up so that they can meet those standards or manage them out. Not just for you to have that efficiency from those individuals, but also for you to send the message to the rest of the staff who may be working at a very different level. I care about this. I'm not going to put the burden on you guys because I can't effectively manage this person. That 1 out of 3 person who is moving, because their managers can't manage, many of them are suggesting that one of the reasons that they are moving is because those managers are not doing a very good job of actually keeping other people accountable. So those are all some of the specific pieces that that we get concerned about, certainly, and that you want to be thinking to yourself, how can I do this better? So when we think about change and how change is handled, you have to be thinking too about how committed are the senior leaders in your practice to that change. If there isn't some agreement by senior leaders and by managers that we are going to change, you have that one stick in the mud, or maybe 2 people are like, we don't really like this, we don't really want to do this. Your employees are going to see that divide. They're going to see that dissension, and they're going to pick sides. So make sure that senior leaders are aligned before you try and get a change project lined up, or you start to engage in a big project relating to change. Because if the senior leaders aren't aligned, the people who follow you are not going to be aligned either. Every day, you're going to have to articulate your values. Some organizations, some practices, some companies will put a core set of values on their website. They'll put a core set of values up in their offices. And then the question is, do you live those values? If the value is, I respect people, and people can hear somebody yelling at somebody or somebody dismissing somebody's ideas in a staff meeting, then the answer is that you may not, in fact, be living the values that you need to be living. And that also will kind of undercut and undermine you. Picking the right team is important. We can talk some more about hiring if you like. But also, I want to talk to you about the process for defining and assigning work. I'm going to talk to you about communication, because communication is hugely important in all of this. And there are cycles of communication that will help you. Remember, too, that change is hard. People are going to resist it. You're going to have some patience about that. If you don't have employee assistance as an employee benefit, you may want to consider it. Employee assistance is a benefit that you can provide to your employees, where if they're struggling psychologically, financially, just from a basic standpoint, gee, I'm having a hard time, employee assistance can be a resource for them that they can go to try and manage that. But understand that there may be some resistance to the changes that you are trying to make. And that dealing with that resistance is something that may take some time. It's really important as a leader and as in fact a manager of other human beings, to put time in your calendar to do that. I manage other people in my office. We have a staff, total staff of about 60, if you include the lawyers. And I will say that there are a number of people that when we have to manage those individuals, may take some time, may take a half an hour a day to get somebody up to speed, or managing a particular problem with an employee may take an amount of time each day for weeks or months. That's part of your job. Managing the humans, besides just practicing medicine, it may be part of your job if you are the owner or a manager in a practice. And so you have to be thinking about the fact that it's going to take you some time to not only train people, but to also teach people, get them through whatever resistance that they may have. No blame. It starts at you. So make sure not to blame employees. If something is broken, look for solutions. Best thing you can do is say, hey, how do you think we should fix this? Or what is it that you're going to do to help us repair this? Meaning you're taking that on with the employee, not putting the full responsibility on them, but inviting them, engaging them in how do we solve this problem? It's not enough as a manager to be available for employees who want to come and tell you what their problems are. It's going to be really important for you to invite employees to also engage in the solution. That's going to be a critical piece. And communicate, communicate. I mentioned to you the myth of employment at will. That is true. Employment at will, while it exists in the world, that I can let somebody go for no reason, with no notice, there are tons of exceptions to this. Easiest exception is discrimination. I let go of this person because, oh my goodness, she needed so much time off because of whatever this underlying condition she has. Maybe she should just be working. But I don't have to tell her the reason because I'm an employer at will. Well, if you made comments about this person's health condition and how much time they're taking off for it, discrimination may be a reason that somebody may come up with, and they may be right, and they may be able to sustain that. So that's an exception to employment at will. You may have contracts, you may have policies. Most practices and most businesses in the United States today have at least some set of policies, employment policies. Those employment policies, just so you know, can be seen as contractual in nature. One great tip that you can have for today is at the end of a policy manual, most employers will have their employees sign it to say that they received it. A big mistake that people make, though, is that they also have them say, and I agree to abide by these policies. If you do that, I handed you these policies. Yes, I expect you to follow them. They're guidelines. These are expectations. But if you have them sign and I agree to abide by them, turn it into a contract like that. So I'm not sure you want to do that. So policies are great to have. They can be really great guidelines. They can put people on notice of what is necessary and what is expected of them, but they can also be contractual in nature. Not saying don't have policies. In fact, I think policies are good. But what I'm saying is you want to make sure that they're well written, and you want to make sure that you have them reviewed by counsel before you publish them, before you update them, so that you can avoid inadvertently creating contractual obligations for yourself. If you do let somebody go for cause, meaning if you actually do have a reason that somebody is going to leave your employee, they better see it coming. And I say that because fundamental fairness, when I think about workplace practices, I think about lawsuits because that's what I'm trained to do. And so I think about a judge and 12 people sitting in a jury box who are going to look at your situation and they're going to wonder. They're going to wonder, what happened here? Why didn't this work out? And even though you're going to say something like, well, Karen's performance was really poor, da da da. If Karen never knew about that, if you just got so frustrated on one particular day that you said, all right, Karen, we're done. I'm not gonna deal with this anymore. Too many mistakes. I want you gone. If that is a surprise to me, you are more likely to get a lawsuit out of that than not, because I didn't see it coming. If, on the other hand, you have been doing a good job of training me as to what I'm supposed to do, retraining if necessary, and then talking to me about performance, giving me regular feedback, maybe even giving me evaluations. And as necessary, maybe some warnings, maybe some disciplinary action. That's possible. But I ought to see it coming if at the end of the day, you're going to get rid of me for something specific. I either saw it in the policies and knew that it wasn't a good thing, or we talked about it in staff meetings, or we talked about it maybe in memos that you sent around to staff. I need to be on notice of what's expected of me, and you need to hold me accountable. So I should see it coming if at the end of the day you're going to pull the trigger. Let me talk a little bit about communication, and then I'll slow myself down here to ask some questions. Good communication is definitely more like waffles than spaghetti. I know that sounds a little silly, but look at that spaghetti on the right-hand side. It's all mixed up. There's too much of it. You can't digest that well or easily. There's just too much. So communication with your employees should look more like waffles. It should be delineated. You should specifically say, this is what I want to talk to you about now, and it should be easily digestible. Clear communication, usually done in a two-way setting so that you can ask me questions and I can respond to your questions, not just chat. That's why I hate these video things, frankly. I'd rather have you all sitting here in front of me and we could have a conversation. But that's a much better way to go than just to dump something on somebody the way you wanted it. It's really about making sure that that information is digestible and that that information is given to somebody in a way that they can understand it and appreciate it. I'm going to give you this as an example, and then I'm going to check for some questions. So at the beginning of that, whatever it is that you're going to do, whether it's a particular assignment for an employee or whether it's even the beginning of their employment, I'm going to set expectations. Those expectations at the top of this chart need to be set with specificity. Hey, I expect you to show up on time. That means that your shift starts at 8:30. I would prefer it if you came in before 8:30 so you're ready to go at 8:30. That's enough specificity that you know what the expectation is. Then I'm going to watch your performance. I'm going to see how that goes. And I may see situations where your performance isn't good, in which case I need to give you feedback on that performance so you can see that the cycle continues. I also, though, and this is a critical step that many managers miss, especially when they're dealing with the change in expectations, is I need to give the employee input. I need to get the employee input rather on what those expectations are. Because in order to improve your practice over time, employees can be agents of change. They can be agents of innovation because they may see something in the performance of their duties where there can be a better efficiency, or maybe there's a different way. So don't poo-poo employees who might have ideas about how to do things better. You want to make sure to leave space in your communication cycle with them and in your relationship with them so that they understand they can come to you with input on the expectations you've given them. After that input is received, then you can either say, you know what, you're right. I'm going to adjust my expectations because I think we should do it this way instead. Thank you for that input. Or you're going to say, you know, I appreciate what you said. I've evaluated it. I actually don't think that's the way we're going to go at this moment. I'd like to reaffirm for you, here's what my expectation is, and let's move forward. These are really important things. I'm going to give you one quick example, and then I'll see if there are questions. There's here in Vermont, and I've been given permission to tell this story. Here in Vermont, there's a continuing care community for people who are 55 and above, and they're cared for through the end of life at this particular community. And when the new human resources person came on at one particular point, they had a staff of approximately 15 people who did cleaning at this community. And there were apartments, there were actual standalone houses, and there were apartments of various sizes in this community. So they had a number of people who were cleaners. And the rule was you get an hour to clean and move on to the next, right? An hour to clean, move on to the next. They had more than half of their cleaners on staff at one particular point when the new HR person came in. More than half the staff were on disciplinary documents. They were on final warnings or close to final warnings. Hey, if you screw this up, because they were missing that 1 hour deadline. They were not cleaning the place in an hour and then moving along. And so more than half the staff was doing it wrong based on the expectations that they had expressed. So the new HR person sat everybody down and said, so let's talk about these expectations. Let's talk about what's going on. And as you can imagine, some of what she heard was, you can't do this in an hour. First of all, we come into somebody's home, they want to talk. We're an opportunity for them to engage with the outside world. And that's part of what we do for customer service. So that takes a little bit of time. And another big thing that they talked about was animals, that some of the apartments and some of the standalone houses had one or two cats or dogs. That takes longer. You're not going to be able to do that in just an hour. So by sitting down with the staff and hearing what they were encountering and understanding, fair point about people wanting to talk to you during the course of that time, and fair point about the animals. So what do you guys think we should do to fix this? So they came up with two innovations. One, you do need to add some additional time. So another 15 minutes or another half hour for some things makes sense. And it may be based on size, it may be based on animals. And the next thing they did was they created a pet team so that everybody rotated, so that, for 4 weeks, you might be on the pet team where you're in those apartments where you're really cleaning out for the pets. And then the other part of the staff is not on that pet team, and they might be able to go a little bit faster. So again, with this cycle, I set my expectations with clarity. I watch the performance. I give feedback to the employees, but I also invite their input. And then I can figure out what, if anything, needs to change. These are effective ways that you can manage that change. So Alex, at this point, I think I'll see if there are questions, specific questions people have.
Sure, got a couple here. First one is keeping great workers made difficult when those in the upper parts of the power structure are not good role models. So in other words, it's just for keeping partners and owners mindful of their influence over tone, workplace mood, culture.
Yeah, I will say that is a big challenge that I see all the time. One of the things that I would do is, if you can, align yourself with a good and talented labor and employment lawyer and ask them how much it costs for one discrimination claim or one claim against the practice for wrongful termination. I will just give you estimates. I do that kind of defense work all the time. Been doing it for almost 30 years. And you can't get out of a suit for defense costs if somebody actually files suit for less than $50,000. It's just not happening. And so think about that. Many employers do have employee practices liability insurance, which is fine, but then your rates are going up the more claims you have. It is critically important from a financial position alone. And sometimes that's what will help with other business owners. You say, hey, do you want this to come out of your pocket? Because that's what's going to happen. Time, energy, and money is what gets spent when people make a claim. And people make a claim when they don't feel like they were treated appropriately. It is way less expensive for an employer to say, hey, what seems to be the problem, to engage that individual, and in fact to exhibit the positive behaviors that are going to help folks. I think a critical thing to do is, if I was an owner in a practice, I would be thinking about, what does that ownership structure look like? Are there ways that we can self-discipline one another? Is that with compensation? Is that with ownership share? Or are there other ways that we can do that?
Thank you. Another question we had come through: can adjustments be made for an employee who would be very hard to operate without? If an otherwise great worker skirts the rules that others follow, can accommodations for that employee be made without forfeiting authority? My own interpretation on that sounds kind of like managing the rock star, but not necessarily the best employee, but they're really good at what they do. And how do you kind of balance those out?
Yeah, so that's a really great point. And this, the text of the slides here is intended intended to go beyond an hour. So that if people have questions afterwards too, feel free to send those in and we'll try and get responses to you. But what you'll see in further down in the slides too goes directly to this point, which is fair does not always mean same, right? Consistency is definitely important. If I have expectations of my employees and I articulate it to everybody, and those expectations are not met by somebody or a group of somebodies, everybody else is going to notice. That's going to hurt morale. It's going to make it difficult. The rock star scenario that you suggest is a really, really good example. You can have somebody who's really super at what they do, but they're an absolute jerk to everybody else and they make everybody else miserable. Part of your expectation has to be cultural. And so even a rock star needs to be managed when that rock star is getting out of hand. Otherwise, you're going to have an entire segment of your workforce that is going to feel like, they don't matter. And it can also lead to, like I said, legal claims. I'll give you an example. A company that I dealt with, food manufacturer, had the person who literally did the recipes, literally was the brainchild of a lot of the recipes. But this particular person couldn't be within 10 feet of another human without touching them on the backside or doing something inappropriate with his hands towards those individuals. And the company was just like, what do we do about this? They finally put him at the end of a hallway with the HR person on one side, one office on one side of him, and the head of the company on the other side. They thought that would take care of it. But it didn't, because he had one of those machines and he started sending pictures to people. So even rock stars need to be managed, because you do want to have as much consistency as possible. If you have to make some allowances based on somebody's schedule or based on perhaps a disability or something along those lines, you may have to have some differences, but be able to explain those differences in a way that makes sense. Obviously, if you have to accommodate somebody because of a disability, you're not telling other employees that they have a disability or what that is. That employee can tell them, but you shouldn't be doing so. But in those instances, you need to be able to say to the employee who's complaining, how come Kerin gets to come in at 10 instead of at 8 like the rest of us? You know what? Is this impacting your ability to get your job done? Because if it's not, it's really nothing you need to be worried about, right? But if it is impacting the way that your job is being done, talk to me, because that part I need to address. So now you're the only person on the phones between 8 and 10, and that's impacting you and the speed with which phones are answered. Sure, we'll get you some help for those hours. Maybe we have to do something like that. So maybe I have to do a little bit more managing, but I won't give up the confidentiality of that. But treat people as consistently as you can based on your values and your expectations. If there are differences, make sure that those differences can be legitimately justified. Other
Wonderful.
questions, Alex?
Those are the only two so far. So if you want
Okay.
to keep going through some other slides, we can keep going.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I will tell you this, that you definitely, and I want to make sure I'm mindful of my time here too, Alex. So you can always just give me the heads up hook. So I will say this, that it is hard. I said communication is important. Communicate, communicate, communicate. There's all different kinds of cycles that you want to engage in. And remember too that not all your employees are going to learn the same way. Not all people are going to hear the same way. There's an old adage for fundraising that you have to, if you want somebody to donate, you have to tell them the same thing 7 different ways in 7 different mediums so that it finally catches that it's important. Similarly, if you are going to express your values or your expectations, you're going to do it in lots of different ways. You might do it in that values statement that you put up on the wall. You might do it in your offer letter. You might do it in your employee handbook. You might do it in a newsletter to your staff. You might do it in a staff meeting where you say, hey, I just want to notice that Kerin did this really great thing today. And I want to recognize Kerin for that, because that way I am messaging to everybody else, this is what I expect from you, and you'll get praise if you do it. And you have to remember too that because people have different communication styles, you might have to communicate in different ways. Not everything should just be an email, so I'm just reading it. Sometimes it has to be in a meeting, so I'm actually going to hear it. Sometimes I'm actually going to have to do it. So you might have to retrain me, or you might have to engage. So another quick thing that I'll say, and this is a tip that I use a lot for live in-person trainings, We often will do an exercise at this point to show that clear communication is important and two-way communication is important. Because oftentimes in today's world, we send a lot of emails, we send a lot of texts. Those are one-way communication where a person does not have the ability to ask questions. The person does not have the ability to get clarity. So something so simple as, hey, I need you to do this and I need you to do it right away. What does that mean? You put that in a text or you put that in an email. I'm in the middle of another project. I think right away is when I can get to it. Your expectation has not been appropriately communicated to me in terms of timing, so I might not meet your expectation. That's going to be frustrating for you, and that's frustrating for me. So if you really have something that is important or that's time sensitive, pick a communication mode that has two-way communication associated with it. Pick up the phone or actually walk down to that person's office and say, hey, do you have a minute? Close the door and say, here's what I need. And this is when I need it by. Make sure that what you're doing with every assignment or with every task is you're also giving people a sense of timing. That's really, really important because if you as a manager are going to hold people accountable, either for their regular duties or for some sort of change, then what you want to be doing is say to somebody, here's what I expect, and here's when I expect it. Timelines are critical. It gives each of us an opportunity to pick check-in points and to be able to adjust expectations in that cycle that I mentioned to you if we need to do so. So make sure that you are giving that timeline. Make sure that you're checking in. And if you say, "Hey, I'll check in with you in a week to see if to see what your progress is," put it on your calendar. Something so simple as an Outlook meeting notice. We all get these Zoom meeting notices. Just an Outlook thing that you're putting on somebody's calendar. Get Kerin a draft by today. If that person accepts it, boom, now the two of you are communicating. It's a really simple way to do it, but really does help things going forward. The other thing is too, when you want to, when we're talking about managing change, think about how you create a culture that embraces change. Do you talk about it in the interview? Do you say, wow, the medical field is really changing these days? We've got everything from electronic medical records to telehealth. Whew, we just used to have somebody come into the office, and meet with us. Gee, now we're doing all these things differently. But hey, here's how we handle it here. So you're showing to that person who might be your employee, we understand change is going to happen all the time. That should be an expectation you have. But look how successful we are about managing that. You do the same thing in orientation. Make sure that you have a good orientation process for employees where they understand that change is going to happen and that they are expected to be part of that, and teach them to expect that kind of change. Same thing with various trainings. Same thing with how you choose to allocate your resources. As an owner of a business, you're going to allocate resources. Make sure that you are allocating resources towards training and retraining for your employees as may be necessary. That's a critical thing. And I think even the value add that you folks have through PCC with some of the seminars that are available and things like that, that's important stuff. The ability to give people support throughout their employment, maybe with outside resources, or maybe with a lunch with you periodically, or a sit down with you periodically, so that they understand they have support, or employee assistance, as I mentioned previously. Critically, keeping people, holding people accountable. As I mentioned, just not the rock star example, but have a regular system by which you hold people accountable. Give people feedback. And a lot of people say, I'm just going to do the annual evaluation. And when they sit down to do the annual evaluation, they don't really have any notes in front of them. So really all they're doing is like, how has Kerin been lately? She's been really good. She did a great project this year. And or earlier this month, that was really great. I'm going to write about that. But if you're doing an annual evaluation and that's all the person is getting throughout the year, it's not likely to reflect the full length of their year. And that can get you in trouble. I'll give you an example. A case that I had a number of years ago, and this is all a matter of public record, was a case where there was a person who was in law enforcement, who was not doing what he was supposed to be doing. In fact, he was accused of, and there was credible evidence, there was racial profiling going on in the stops that he was doing of people on the street or on the road. And in fact, one of the pieces of evidence that was out there was that this person might not have received that feedback on a regular basis in employment evaluations. They did receive a lot of that feedback in very specific disciplinary documents, but in an evaluation that was shortly near the time that that person was terminated, there was no mention of it because the manager just, it hadn't occurred to them at that point. And I might be a little loose in that characterization, but the answer is we had all of this documentation that this person was a bad employee. And yet, right before they were fired, the defense said, look at this document, which is the annual evaluation. There's nothing here about that. So you have to have that consistency, and you have to have those check-ins throughout the year and not just wait for one point in time where you're providing somebody with feedback. It has to be a pretty regular thing. I'll stop there, Alex, too, and ask if people have any final questions, and then I will make suggestions to folks that feel free to read through these slides. They entail a lot of different elements of managing and communicating with people about change and just regularly, and we'll welcome any questions or feedback afterwards too. But Alex, do we have any final questions?
Sure, one more here.
Sure.
Ask if you have any suggestions for encouraging a mentorship approach where there was none before. Really, how do you avoid the appearance that it's required when you're really just trying to offer up opportunities as you start something like that up?
So that's a great point. I mean, I think if you as a business owner are trying to start a new opportunity, I would announce it as such, and announce it as hey, we're trying to do something that we haven't done before. And so if people are interested in, this kind of an opportunity, I'm willing to have folks come talk to me about it. How you put together that mentorship matters, though, because I always think about intent and impact, right? What was my intent? Well, I wanted to make sure that this young woman was mentored because, gee, I'm a female lawyer. I want to help other female lawyers. That's great, except if I have a male associate who's not getting that kind of attention, there could be a sex differential there. I may not have intended it, but that may be the impact. So if you are going to put something in play that can even be a positive and a benefit, you want to pick a point in time at which you're going to do it. You want to make sure that there's, an announcement of that so people understand it. But you also want to make sure that your intent is good and that the impact is appropriate. So have a good process for which people could qualify for that benefit, or create a rotation where a bunch of people may get the opportunity for that kind of a benefit so that the impact is equitable. That would be my suggestion there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that is all we have for questions right now. Is there anything else you want to make sure you say before we wrap up? We're about a minute to go.
Yeah, so I guess the final comments that I would make is, managing other human beings, especially when you are a practitioner and especially when you are a business owner, it feels like you don't have time to do it. But I will tell you this, as somebody who's been a business owner for a number of years myself and also a practicing lawyer, it takes time. It is manageable if you put the time to do it, if you set it aside and you make that concentrated time, because people will get in the habit of that communication. People will get in the habit of that cycle, and you can create some really good efficiencies with employees. But that communication is critically important, not only for managing change, but just for managing a practice in pre-COVID days and when we didn't have change around every single corner. So I wish all of you good luck. If you have questions about the materials that you get from this or what has been said in the training today, feel free to reach out through PCC and I'd be happy to respond. Thanks for the opportunity, Alex.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody who's been watching and who watches this later on the recordings. Thank you again, Kerin, and everybody watching, and have a great day.
Thanks. Good luck.